Hello, everyone. So, there are quite a few things I found strange about this World Cup, but we're going to focus on just one thing today: the fact that Lamine Yamal was photographed as a baby with Lionel Messi. Here in this post, we're told that Leo Messi, reflecting on this photo, said, "This photo is crazy. I took a picture with him when he was still a baby, and here we are, the two of us, facing each other today in the World Cup." Because for those who haven't been following, the last match of the World Cup pitted Spain, with Lamine Yamal, who plays for FC Barcelona and wears the number 10, against Argentina, who also wore the number 10 for a very long time at FC Barcelona. They were playing against each other. So quite frankly, I think this goes beyond statistics. It's not just an incredible coincidence. So everything I say in this video is speculation on my part. It's not proven fact. We're going to venture into gray areas here, but these are speculations I find interesting to explore. I've noted several possibilities that would explain this on several different levels. So regarding the photo, it's not AI. Don't let anyone tell you in a few months, "Oh yeah, no, actually it was a joke, it was AI. Damn, this doesn't bode well for us, let's just say it's AI." No, here are the original photos I found from the shoot. So this is Lamine Yamal's mother, okay? So this photo was taken in 2007 as part of a charity event organized by the newspaper Diario Sport and UNICEF. The idea was to create a calendar to raise funds. Lamine Yamal's family was randomly selected from among other families to participate in this photo shoot. Lionel Messi, then a promising young player for FC Barcelona, was the chosen ambassador to pose with the children. Now let's take this a step further. What are the possibilities in terms of some kind of conspiracy? There's the AIR project, meaning genetic selection. The theory is that FC Barcelona, or some higher power in world football, leaves nothing to chance. So this photo shoot wouldn't have been a charity event, but an energy compatibility test. The idea would be that the club's scouts, equipped with advanced predictive technologies, could identify baby Yamal's genetic potential long before he ever touched a ball. The photo shoot was a way to brand the subject, introduce him into the club's inner circle, and create an indelible psychological bond between King Messi and Prince Yamal. What's also a bit strange is that when Lamine Yamal greeted the King of Spain after the match, everyone else shook the King's hand. If it had been just anyone, for example, someone from Real Madrid, according to some commentators, they would have been fired for that alone. So instead of shaking the King's hand, Lamine Yamal gave him a high five, with his shoulder. You high five and then bump shoulders. So this demonstrates extreme familiarity, but perhaps this familiarity isn't without meaning, since I'm telling you. We're going to delve into this. It could also be a ritual of passing on, a self-fulfilling prophecy. From this perspective, Messi wouldn't just be a player, but an initiate. The photo would be an occult ritual of talent transfer. By holding the baby in his hand, Messi would have, intentionally or not, transferred a part of his footballing essence. The fact that Yamal became a prodigy wouldn't be the result of training, but the direct consequence of this early physical contact, which would have activated, so to speak, latent abilities in the child. This is the kiss of fate theory. Now let's take a brief detour here. If you've seen films like Renaissance with Ben Kingsley or Frankenheimer's Seconds, which I've discussed many times, they deal with the transfer of both technology and occult powers from one body to another. But here we're venturing into darker, more sinister territory. Then there's the Matrix theory, the glitch in the simulation. If we consider our reality to be a computer simulation, a very popular theory among some, this photo would be irrefutable proof of programming laziness, so to speak, or an Easter egg like in GTA games, The simulation developers would have reused assets, including characters, to save time. They supposedly took Messi's 3D model and placed it next to a baby 3D model of Yamal to create a coherent backstory for the future prodigy. The fact that it went viral 17 years later, even more than that, 19 years later, would be a system bug the simulation administrators hadn't anticipated. Fourth theory, the Truman Show of football. Lamine Yamal wouldn't be a child born by chance, but a child nurtured by the system to become Messi's successor. The photo would be proof that his destiny was predetermined from the start. His entire life, his time at La Masia, his meteoric rise, All of it would have been orchestrated so that the public would accept the new Messi without question, relying on this iconic image as emotional proof. Because let's get back to basics. Mathematically, statistically, it's impossible. What are the odds, if it's pure chance, that Leo Messi, who was number 10 at FC Barcelona, would do a photo shoot with Lamine Yamal, who would later also become number 10 at FC Barcelona, and who would also become an extremely talented player? Not an average player who spends 15 years in shady clubs, you know what I mean? As if by chance, and what's more, he'll be facing off in the World Cup against the boy he held in his arms 20 years earlier. It will surely be one of the last matches Lionel Messi plays for Argentina, I think at 39 years old. Statistically incredible. It's worse than winning the Euro Millions. So to play devil's advocate, what could we say to temper our conspiracy theory a bit? It could be survival bias, the trap of our perception. That is to say, we only see the winners in general. There have been thousands of babies photographed with Messi, movie stars or politicians. The vast majority of these children have become anonymous, but we never see a story about the child who was photographed with Lionel Messi and who became an accountant in Lyon, you see. And when we see Lamine Yamal, our brains might make a reasoning error, meaning they forget all the failures and only remember the exceptional success. This is called the survival bias. The fact that he became a star would be a statistical anomaly, but someone had to be that anomaly. We would also have the probability zone, the argument against pure chance. Here we should highlight a parallel, for example. Is it pure chance, for instance, that Cyril Hanouna became famous for a time in the French media landscape, and that a France Télévisions camera interviewed him when he was a teenager in front of his high school among other students? It's an archive from the INA. So, it was in October 1989 at the Lycée Hélène Boucher in the 20th arrondissement. How can I put it? I lived in Paris for 28 years. As if by chance it's not unknown people like me or others who are being filmed, and yet I've been to some pretty, well, not bad schools anyway. But it makes you wonder if, in fact, the media didn't already prefer working-class high schools to ask, so what do you think about religion in schools? Blah blah blah. But then again, what are the odds there too that Cyril Hanouna, already in front of a camera at that age, would become a star of the French media landscape? Well, that's precisely what we're going to talk about because it's interesting. The probability zone could be a matter of social geography. For Lamine Yamal, for example, he lived in Barcelona. If you're a kid with extraordinary football talent in Barcelona, where do you go? To La Masia, Barca's youth academy. It's not a coincidence, it's more like a funnel. The system is designed to attract local talent. The photo with Messi isn't the cause of his talent, it's a symptom of his environment. He was in the thick of things. As for Cyril Hanouna, well, he hung around high schools or film sets, or was in circles where the media circulated. People who become famous are often those who, from a young age, position themselves in areas with high media density, whereas if you stay home, you'll be filmed much less. If you spend your life in places where cameras are present, the probability of being filmed becomes high. Yes, that's true. In fact, when I was younger, I turned down cameras. It must have been BFM TV or others. So, it's true that there's that too, to play devil's advocate. There's also the law of large numbers versus human intuition. Our brains are biologically incapable of understanding probabilities involving very large numbers. If you toss a coin 1,000,000 times, there will be sequences of 20 heads in a row. If you happen to land on one of these sequences in the middle, you'll say, "That's impossible, it's rigged." And yet out of 1,000,000 tosses, it's mathematically inevitable. The world is vast, but there are so many interactions that impossible coincidences happen every day. But since we only live one life, we tend to think of these coincidences as signs of destiny, when they are simply rare events that were bound to happen to someone, somewhere. Okay, now that we've played devil's advocate and discussed the prisms of perceptual bias, let's return to our initial angle, which leans a bit more towards conspiracy. In the theory of a scripted reality, if we live in a simulation, it's possible that significant events, like the emergence of a new global star, are pre-programmed with narrative anchors. For the public to accept Lamine Yamal as the new Messi, a powerful image was needed, a bridge between the past and the future. In this theory, the photo of Messi and baby Yamal in 2007 isn't a coincidence, it's a data insertion, an asset injected into the simulation's past so that 19 years later, the narrative is perfect. So, in the context of a simulation, if we go back to the example of Hanuna, would the fact that I've never been filmed by a camera, or you, unlike Hanuna, be proof that we're a secondary character, a non-player character, NPC, in the simulation? Although I don't think I'm an NPC, I actually find that there are many people in the world we encounter who seem soulless, who aren't vibrant, etc. But then again, we don't really know. Maybe I or we are the NPCs, whereas celebrities would be main characters whose script is written in advance. Now let's take this a step further with a logical argument from a business perspective. So if a company, FC Barcelona for example, could identify its product, the player, from birth, it would eliminate investment risks and transfer costs. We'll see if, when we analyze the feasibility of such a program at this level, such a large-scale genetic surveillance program, we'll encounter some obstacles, so we're going to delve deeper here. It's simply a matter of thinking. In previous decades, clubs traditionally, to have a very good player on their team, had to identify him, sometimes quite late, and pay absolutely enormous transfer fees. It could have been tens of millions of euros before, now sometimes hundreds of millions. What could be more cost-effective ultimately? It would be to have a player who is essentially nurtured like a farmed salmon within the club, almost from birth, so that we can precisely control his development. Because as we'll see later, to reach this level of talent, there's not only DNA, there's epigenetics. The environment needs to be healthy and conducive, meaning the young player needs to be exposed to the best training, the best techniques, and so on. It's not just about DNA, but at the same time, if these clubs were signing players as soon as they're born, well, yes, that would be a completely different story. So we're going to ask ourselves if, for example, I'm going off on a tangent here, a super powerful football club could have connections, for example, with certain local doctors or pharmacists, like in Barcelona or the Barcelona region, who would have done a DNA study of every child from a disadvantaged background, so to speak, born in the area. And if they could be informed, I'm telling you, we're going to go there. Currently, in mainstream science, the scientific reports we have don't allow us to predict athletic talent at birth. And that's for a fundamental reason. Talent is polygenic. There are several reasons. There's genetic complexity. There's no such thing as a football gene, for one thing. Athletic performance is the result of thousands of genetic variants interacting with muscle contraction speed, aerobic capacity, bone density, reflexes, peripheral vision, and so on. Epigenetics also plays a role. Even if a child possesses an ideal genetic profile, the speed gene for example, its expression, like Leo Messi when he was younger, he was tiny but incredibly fast, depends on his environment, nutrition, sleep, stress, early training. A child with immense genetic potential can become a mediocre player if he doesn't receive the right stimulation at the right time. We can all agree on that. There's also the psychological factor, resilience, the ability to handle pressure, tactical intelligence. These are cognitive traits that develop with experience and education and are largely invisible in a newborn's DNA. There's also the operational risk, the leak theory. For a club to implement such a system, it would need accomplices, doctors, pharmacists, technicians, laboratories, archivists, and, well, just a side note, we said the same thing about COVID-19, and it's still quite likely that several powerful people agreed to carry out this whole deception, right? For example, I don't know, all the heads of social security sectors could be co-opted into the same club outside of their professional activities. And indeed, if there's one person in charge of each department or region, well, you can limit the risk. Here you're telling 50 people that we're going to have this health policy, etc. You always have to dig. You can't just say, no, it's impossible that there's a conspiracy on such a large scale. Anything is possible. That doesn't mean their plans are perfect, that there aren't any black sheep in the system, etc., but anything is possible. So we're still playing devil's advocate here. The risk would also be the sheer volume. Barcelona has thousands of births a year, so you'd have to sequence the DNA of thousands of children to find just one who's a prodigy. But then again, do you remember the videos I made for you about Epstein? The strange things we found in their email exchanges where they seemed very interested in DNA sequencing, etc., for a long time? It's true that there are some questions to ask, especially when you know that simple PCR tests can now obtain DNA, whereas before, a person had to be in a police database, for example. Well, it's true that we've all given them our data. There's also the probability of a leak into the real world. The more people a secret involves, the shorter its lifespan. All it would take is one disgruntled doctor, one parent with access to a file, or one investigative journalist to bring the club down. The consequences, criminal penalties, a transfer ban, moral bankruptcy, would be far more costly than buying a player for 100 million euros. Is that true or not? Yeah. Well, I'd still add a major caveat to that reasoning. Legally speaking, ironclad confidentiality agreements really do allow you to shut anyone up. Then there's the cost versus the benefit. There's the cost of buying players after the fact, for example. Hey, we absolutely need a player. Well, since he's already, 19 years old and he's already being noticed by other clubs, well, we have to buy him. Okay, fine, you put 120 million euros on him. Yes, it's expensive, it's true, it's a fortune. But the cost of an illegal clandestine genetic surveillance program over 20 years with hundreds of corrupt employees would also be astronomical. That's where the problem lies. FC Barcelona and other major clubs have so far found a more efficient and legal solution, scouting networks and data. So how do they really do it? Actually, the new conspiracy is big data. If we step away from the conspiracy theory for a moment, clubs aren't necessarily looking at DNA, they're looking at data, big data. There's the territorial network. Barca, like Real Madrid or Chelsea, leaves nothing to chance. They have scouts everywhere, but above all, they have partnerships with hundreds of local amateur clubs. It's a funnel effect. They don't look at birth, they look as soon as a child starts to touch a ball, around 5 or 6 years old. At that age, talent is visible. They draw all the talent from the region towards La Masia. So Lionel Messi, I believe it was his coach at Newell's Old Boys in Argentina, who really spotted his potential. And then it reached the ears of FC Barcelona. And well, in Leo Messi's time, well, in quotes, it was perhaps less strange, it was perhaps still a natural progression for all this to happen, because you'll see we're going to go deep, and it's perhaps a bit stranger now. So how do they actually do it? There's predictive analytics. Today, in 2026, clubs use AI software that analyzes thousands of youth matches. They don't look at DNA, but they do look at the rate of development. If an 8-year-old has game vision 30% above the average for their age group, the AI will detect it. This includes peripheral vision in particular. So, officially Lionel Messi, for example, had a growth hormone deficiency, meaning he would have reached a maximum height of 1.50 meters if he hadn't taken growth hormones. And that's expensive, costing around $1,000 a month at the time. Either his father invented the legend that FC Barcelona decided to cover his treatment and bring him into the club, or the treatment was always reimbursed by Social Security in Argentina, and the rest is just storytelling. But in any case, Barca paid because they had already identified his exceptional talent, and at the time that was after seeing him play, not before. We agree on that, so Barca made a financial bet. They saw raw talent, they assessed the risk, the cost of development versus the potential gain. That's venture capital. So, to continue playing devil's advocate, Barca wouldn't necessarily need to know who will be born gifted. It's enough for them to be the only club in the region with the resources to train, nurture, and coach all the children who show even the slightest potential from the age of 5. By covering the entire territory, they mathematically end up capturing the future geniuses. It's structural dominance. But here we were saying, to play devil's advocate, that having the right DNA isn't enough, etc. So that theory wouldn't hold water. Yeah, but if we look at the other side, young Lamine Yamal joined a club very early at the age of 3, at CF La Torreta. So my speculative hypothesis is, if Barca or other clubs were to advise parents very early on, for example, to raise their children solely for football, promising them a big contract for their child in a few years, or even secretly paying the parents so that they have the best possible conditions until they grow up, that would contradict the reasoning we had about the environment, since in this case the player's environment would be ideal and therefore it would complement the already exceptional DNA. Epigenetics would be perfect too, because we have to tell the truth. Often the parents of these kinds of children come from extremely working class backgrounds, so it's always the same old blackmail with money. For example, Lamine's father had Lamine when he was 15, so who keeps their child at 15 these days? Unless there's a reason to do so. And why would there be a reason to do so? Because it's been detected early on that, you know what I mean? Imagine he's 19, his father's 33. That's pretty strange when you think about it. So that's the kind of thing, this is a typical marker of a very popular environment, and Barca or other clubs might very well know this, and by showering parents with money, I don't see why they would say no to some kind of experimental program. So, let's go a little further. Isn't this what I'm about to describe? The economic reality of modern football, but the hidden reality? We would have the patronage model, showering parents with money, offering the best conditions, monitoring the child from a very young age. And this already exists, even officially. In the world of top-level football, when a club like Barca, Real Madrid or Chelsea spots an 8 or 10-year-old prodigy, the club doesn't just want to give them a ball, there's the family package. If the family is struggling financially, the club will often find the father or mother a job within the club's network, pay the rent, or offer a scholarship. There's also the control of the environment. The club makes sure the child eats well, sleeps well, and receives top-notch medical care. This isn't philanthropy, it's asset protection. They invest in the family to secure the player. So yes, this has already been seen. A club buying a child's environment to maximize their chances of success. However, there could be a limit to the return on investment for a club doing this from birth. Firstly, there's the cost of risk. Sequencing DNA or sponsoring 100 families of newborns costs a fortune. If 99 of those 100 children fail, for example due to injury at 14, a lack of mental fortitude or growth problems, which didn't stop them from noticing Lionel Messi, right? And there's a loss of interest, well, the club would have lost millions for nothing. There's also the natural filter. Football is a sport that demands a rare combination of physicality, technique, vision, and psychology. A child might be genetically perfect at birth, but if they lack the drive or game intelligence that develops around age 7 to 10, they'll never make it. Yes, but conversely, one could argue that with a little MK Ultra brainwashing, it might be possible to artificially create that drive or game intelligence. The funnel strategy. Clubs generally prefer to let amateur clubs and local football academies do the initial screening for free. They wait until the child is 6, 7, or 8 years old, as in the case of Lionel Messi, to see who stands out. It's much more profitable to pay a player who has already proven their abilities than to gamble on a baby. For now, we're staying in the realm of, well, I won't go too far into that for now. There's also the legal risk. Barca could bribe parents, for example, but FIFA has very strict rules. There's Article 19 of the regulations on the status and transfer of players, specifically regarding the transfer of minors. If a club is caught red-handed manipulating or paying parents to acquire a child, it risks massive recruitment bans. But at the same time, this has already happened to Barca, Real Madrid, and Atletico Madrid in the past. So for that reason, you could say they can't create an official experimental program. They have to remain completely discreet. If they did it too openly, the system would collapse under the sanctions. Then there's social determinism. Often football is the only way out for very poor families. Clubs know very well that for these families, the proposed contract is a matter of survival. So they have enormous leverage. It's a form of modern-day servitude. The club takes care of the family, and in return, the family, in a sense, belongs to the club. The player is no longer free to make his own choices. He has been a product of the club since childhood. So, typically, one could say that as soon as a talent emerges around age 6 to 8, they intervene massively to colonize the child's environment. Money, housing, parents' jobs, to ensure that he doesn't slip away from them. That's high-risk talent management. Right now, the prodigy isn't created by the club, they're snapped up by the club as soon as they become a profitable asset. But we're going to take this a step further. It wouldn't be profitable if they had to pay a family, etc. But let's imagine it's human cloning. How would that be technically possible? Because the only thing that would need to be invented is a story to create fictitious parents. Find a random dad, a random mom, handsomely paid with ironclad confidentiality agreements signed with the club, stipulating that their real identity must not be revealed, and have these fake parents later claim to be the child's parents, while the child would actually be the club's property. After all, we have testimonies from the rapper Kid Buu, who is also a Raelian, and who says that he himself is the product of a genetic program. So we don't have to take this seriously, but how is it that clones exist among the Raelians? They claim they've already succeeded in cloning. Okay, we don't have to believe them either, but let's try to turn the argument around a bit. That is, what if cults and other opaque organizations actually allow scientists to go much further than mainstream science? So let's separate two things: the technical feasibility of cloning, what science can do, and the logistical feasibility of our scenario, what human organization can conceal. So how could such an operation be analyzed? 1. The technical barrier. Is cloning perfected? Well, human reproductive cloning, the method of nuclear transfer of somatic cells, faces major obstacles that mainstream science hasn't yet overcome. A massive failure rate. For example, creating Dolly the sheep required 277 attempts to obtain a single viable lamb. But then again, that was 30 years ago. So a football club, even a multi-billion-dollar one, couldn't afford to produce 300 embryos hoping for a single viable baby without a massive leak. We also have the problem of epigenetics, as we've seen. Cloning doesn't replicate experience. Even if you clone Messi, you get a newborn. This newborn won't have Messi's reflexes, muscle memory, or vision. It will have Messi's genetic potential, but it will have to learn everything. At the same time, you could argue that with a good MK Ultra or some serious brainwashing, if you show it Messi's game footage 8 hours a day for 20 years, there's a good chance its brain will learn. Similarly, there's cellular aging, for example, one of the major concerns of cloning. Telomere length, the ends of chromosomes. Some clones have shown signs of premature aging. For a top athlete whose career depends on perfect physical health, this is a huge risk. So we'll address this topic later because precisely I think they're bringing in and fielding increasingly younger players, which could be a sign that something's wrong. We'll come back to that later. So if we consider current scientific understanding, science doesn't allow us to guarantee a product, a player identical to the original. A clone would be a unique individual with their own personality, not a carbon copy of the adult. Then there's the logistical feasibility, the storytelling, and the fictional parents. If we imagine that cloning technology was secretly mastered, which is a science fiction hypothesis, how would they hide the child? There would be the creation of an identity. This is the most complex point. In a modern state, a child must be registered with the civil registry. Birth certificates, medical records, and vaccinations are required. To create a false existence, it would be necessary to bribe officials at a very high level, hospital, city hall, administration. This is a major security flaw. The more people involved, the greater the risk of leaks. Then there's the role of the parents. The idea of paying parents to play a part is a classic method used by intelligence services. For example, those dealing with Russian illegals. It's entirely possible to find people willing to sign confidentiality agreements, NDAs, in exchange for life-changing sums of money. Yes, we're changing fields, but you remember in music, the parents of, what was his name? Little Jordy. No, it's tough being a baby. Then there's the monitoring of the product, in quotes. The club wouldn't need to hide the child in a bunker. It would suffice to place him with a contracted family in a controlled geographical area and ensure ultra-strict medical and nutritional monitoring under the guise of talent tracking. So we'll be talking about the Raelians and Clonid in the scientific community. Clonid's claims of having cloned the baby in 2002 are considered a hoax. They never provided independent DNA evidence. Yeah, but didn't they provide it because they weren't operating legally? You see, what do we really know about what goes on in cults? Just because they decided not to provide evidence to reputable scientists doesn't mean those same reputable scientists should scoff and call it a hoax. So from the perspective of mainstream science, cloning would be risky, a bit too expensive, too time-consuming, and biologically uncertain. But here's the thing, what really strikes me as odd, and I'm not saying this is proven, it's just my intellectual speculation, is when people said, some clones have shown signs of premature aging, and that was 30 years ago, and that for a top-level athlete, that would be a huge risk. Yeah, but look at Lamine Yamal. They turned pro at 15. He made his professional debut in 2023 at only 15 years old. So even though he was very young, all of this is also somewhat reminiscent of Kylian Mbappé. He made his debut for the French national team at 18, and at 19, like Yamal, he was already playing in his first World Cup. Amazing. It's funny that we're analyzing Kylian Mbappé because he also wears the number 10 at Real Madrid. Lionel Messi wore the number 10 for most of his career, and so did Lamine Yamal. Don't bother looking at this photo because that's from when he was with the national team, but at FC Barcelona, he's number 10. So as I was saying, look at Lamine Yamal, well, they turned pro at only 15 years old, very young, and here he is playing his first World Cup at 19, like Mbappé. As if somehow they had to rush things in case there was a genetic problem later on, and they wanted him to be profitable as quickly as possible. That's for sure. So earlier we were talking about the current state of classical scientific knowledge, and in fact the classical scientific system has safeguards in place to prevent any morally reprehensible abuse from a genetic point of view. If there were mafia-like or cult-like organizations, or organizations that exploit the secrecy and opacity of cults to experiment without any safeguards and become far more advanced than scientists in the mainstream, then we're entering the realm of black science, clandestine military or mafia-run science. In this scenario, we would potentially have an organization with unlimited resources, operating in total secrecy, without any ethical constraints. You'll agree that the reasoning changes radically. In this scenario, the limitations we mentioned earlier, the cost, the ethics, the probability of failure, are no longer obstacles but variables that the organization seeks to optimize. So, what might such a clandestine sports bioengineering program look like? A paradigm of science without safeguards. In the traditional scientific world, 90% of the time is spent justifying ethics, obtaining authorizations, and ensuring the safety of subjects. Except in the case of COVID-19, they decided to bypass these steps, but, well, generally speaking, I say. But if a mafia or cult-like organization decides to eliminate these steps, then there is an exponential acceleration. They can test thousands of genetic variants, CRISPR-Cas9, gene therapy on embryos, without waiting for long-term safety results. It's the principle of the failed test taken to the extreme, direct human experimentation. Where a researcher waits to validate a technique, the organization applies it directly. If the subject dies or develops a pathology, they are eliminated or the program is stopped, and they move on to the next one. It's cruel, but it's an extremely rapid research method. Access to cutting-edge technologies. These organizations don't need to publish in scientific journals. They buy the best researchers in the world, place them in secret labs, isolated sites, often in countries with weak legal regulations. A bit like, I can't remember exactly, in Dan Brown's books, it's the case in several of them actually, where there's a scientist working in a secret lab. And so this organization would pay these people, these scientists, sums that are impossible to refuse, very tempting indeed. So if we had this real concept of a product with a limited lifespan, we took the example of Lamine Yamal for instance, so precocious, it's like they're made for it. 3 years in a football club, 15 he turns pro, 19 years old, first World Cup. It would be a profitability strategy, the product's life cycle. If you've created a genetically modified or optimized athlete, you probably know that their body has an expiration date, telomere problems, premature aging due to overstimulation. By the way, on a side note, I'm willing to bet that players from that generation like Mbappé, Yamal, etc. will last. They'll be past their prime long before the age they reach, whether it's Lionel Messi, who's already 39, or even Maradona, who played until, 48, 52, I can't remember. Or David Beckham, who played until, I don't remember, 46. No, I'm willing to bet that these players will be washed up by 27 or 28. So what would the strategy be? Well, you have to extract maximum value as early as possible. Play them at 15, make them shine at 17, at 19, and make sure they're a global star before their body starts showing signs of fatigue or decline. What would the narrative be? Well, to mask this artificial origin, the organization would need a credible narrative. The kid from the slums who learned everything on the streets is the best possible cover. No one suspects a lab when the story is one of pure talent born from poverty. So, what would the organizational structure be? Well, a compartmentalized model. For such secrecy to hold, it would need a compartmentalized, cult mafia-type structure. Total compartmentalization, meaning the parents who are paid don't know the doctors don't know the club's scouts don't know the investors, and each link only sees a small piece of the puzzle, the compound, the living space. The child isn't raised like a normal child. He's raised in a controlled environment with nutrition, sleep, and training, monitored 24/7 by algorithms. It's a talent farm. Identity control is the most critical point. For the product, in quotation marks, to become a pro player, it needs paperwork. The organization must infiltrate the civil registry, town hall, hospitals, to create a legal identity from scratch. This is where links with local mafia networks become essential. So, we're going pretty far with our fictional scenario. I warned you. Why would it be more advanced than mainstream science? Well, that's the scariest part, because mainstream science is inherently constrained by the precautionary principle. If you want to create an athlete with higher bone density, increased recovery capacity, and altered pain tolerance, mainstream science will tell you, it's dangerous, it's forbidden, it's unnatural. But a clandestine organization thinks, what are the risks of death? 20%, acceptable. What's the financial gain? 500 million euros per player. That's profitable. They can use gene editing techniques, that is, inject viral vectors to modify gene expression in muscles that no one will be able to detect because doping tests look for chemical substances, not endogenous genetic modifications. So, what would be the ultimate limit? The signal, because even in this scenario there remains a problem, the statistical anomaly. If a club suddenly produces a player every 2 years who is physically, technically, and mentally 10 times better than the world average, well, the world will eventually start asking questions. But at the same time, does the world even ask questions? Do you think so? Aren't people becoming increasingly stupid? And here again, haven't certain elites contributed to making us all increasingly stupid? What questions are people asking? They're not even asking questions about the pseudo-wars that are happening, how the world is. So, anyway. But these organizations for now should still be, and when I say should, it's conditional. If they were to do this, they would have to be subtle. They can't create 11 clones of Lionel Messi. They have to create exceptional but credible players. They also have to sacrifice players. That is, let some fail to maintain the illusion of chance and natural selection. Once again, you should watch the Harrison Bergeron TV movie that I translated for you a long time ago, which is on YouTube. So, in this fictional scenario, I described what is called in geopolitics and technology an asymmetry of power. If an entity, whether it's a football club or a conglomerate, decides to disregard moral rules, it enters a biological arms race. Sport would then become a technological battleground, where the football pitch is the showcase, but the real match is played in underground laboratories. It would be a dark but logically coherent vision. If the financial stakes, billions of dollars, outweigh the risk, the prison, the scandal, then the most powerful players will always be tempted to cross the line. The only safeguard against this isn't morality, but transparency and independent oversight, things that, in the world of football today, are often more than opaque. Okay, so we're going to focus more on Lamine Yamal. So his father was 15 years old when he was born, right? He joined a football club, the little guy, at the age of 3. Right, having posed at just a few months old for a photo with Lionel Messi, right? So he comes from a family of immigrants from Morocco and Guinea who came to work in Spain. They settled in Granollers in the province of Barcelona. Well, okay, what a coincidence. And then they settled in Rocafonda, Mataró. So look, Rocafonda is there, Barcelona is there, it's not far. So they didn't come to settle, I don't know, they're in Odin. They didn't come to settle where there's nobody, I don't know, chaos, right? They came near Barcelona, perhaps knowing that the Barcelona club is one of the biggest football institutions in Spain. Perhaps also, if all of this had been planned from the beginning, if scientists had been able to detect the little boy's DNA and talent from the moment he was born, they supposedly told the real or fake parents, depending on which version you prefer, to come and settle there, because they'd have to train the little one. And then the little one joined CF Rocafonda for a few months, then FC Barcelona's youth academy at the age of 7, where he completed his secondary education. So that's profitable too. Look, for example, at Lionel Messi, who was also nurtured by FC Barcelona. We're not saying there were genetic factors or anything like that, but look, he ended up staying from 2000 to 2021. That's huge. It helps eliminate some of the competition. He stays at your club for 21 years. Naturally, that's profitable. So during his first training session at 15 years old, at FC Barcelona, when he turned pro, journalist Jordi Roura reportedly said about Lamine Yamal, "I can't think of a precedent at Barca for such a young player training, so often with the first team. Now we should look at Messi. Was he older than that? Perhaps." Messi arrived at FC Barcelona in 2000, so he was 13 years old. That's right. Let's now look a little closer at Messi, because there are always strange little things that could indicate a predestination or a pre-existing environment. They never come completely out of nowhere. Messi, as it happens, has a godfather, Claudio Biancucci, who is already the father of 3 professional footballers, Maxi, Emmanuel, and Bruno Biancucci, and Bojan Krkic, his teammate at FC Barcelona from 2007 to 2011, was also a 4th cousin. So, to conclude this video, these players don't become average. Lionel Messi, for example, has made over 1,000 appearances, is the 5th highest scorer and top assist provider in football history. He has scored over 900 career goals and provided over 400 assists, for a total of over 1,300 goal contributions, an absolute record in football history. So, regarding Lamine Yamal's story, how is it that there are photos of him as a baby, with the man who would become one of the best players in the world? How is it that he would have the same number 10 on his jersey? How is it that he would play against him at the age of 19 in the World Cup? Again, someone who goes through a UNICEF casting call and so on. Yes, that could be the case, but why didn't he become just an average player? How is it that, as if by chance, he became Lamine Yamal, also one of the most promising players? I hope I've answered these questions with my various theories. If you like my video, I do have a Patreon, mostly in French, but now I began adding content like that in English with my French accent. I'll see you very soon in my next video.